responsibility. As we head into this Shabbat Vayigash, I encourage us all to seriously ponder, how do we handle responsibility? I am encouraging us all to be more responsible and to do what we can for ourselves and not to expect the government or others to do for us. In this week's Torah reading of Vayigash, Yosef did create a plan for the government of Egypt to help provide for everyone in need during the famine. And it may seem great for the government to step in and help those in need. But in reality, looking at the big picture, is it? In this current situation in the Torah, for the years preceding the famine, Egypt taxed the people 20% to prepare for the years of need ahead. While that taxation may seem at first to be just kindly planned altruism, with fuller, clearer analysis, it can be more seen as excessive taxation and excessive centralization of power and excessive government bureaucracy. This excessive government control led eventually to the people becoming indentured to Egypt, and the people were required to farm their land for the Pharaoh. This alleged help from the government, in reality, was not as merciful as on the surface it could be seen. Let us not just look here at what we want to think. Let us not just look here at what we so want to believe. But let us actually look at what in reality happened. In this parsha, when the people are in need of food, Egypt is ready to provide them with what they need. Egypt does not just give it to them, though, but they certainly do pay for it. Let me directly share some from this week's reading. The English translation. Joseph gathered all the money that was to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan through the provisions that they were purchasing. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's palace. And when the money was exhausted from the land of Egypt and from the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph saying, "Give us bread. Why should we die in your presence? For the money is gone." And Joseph said, "Bring your livestock, and I will provide for you in return for your livestock if the money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph. And Joseph gave them bread in return for the horses, for the flocks of sheep, for the herds of cattle, and for the donkeys. Thus he provided them with bread for all their livestock during that year. And when that year ended, they came to him in the next year and said to him, "We will not withhold from my lord that with the money and flocks of cattle having been exhausted, nothing is left before my lord but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your eyes? Acquire us and our land for bread, and we, with our land, will become serfs to the Pharaoh." The government has now taken possession of the people and their land. Furthermore, this supposedly temporary 20% tax actually then becomes a permanent tax. The Pharaoh is from thenceforth due 1/5 of everything. In comparison, by the way, years later, in the days of Shmuel, the people wanted a king, and Shmuel warned them that the king could unfairly take 1/10 of everything. And here, in this situation, Egypt is taking twice that which Shmuel warned the people about in the future. Similarly, in modern times, political leaders may seem to kindly give free health care, free food, free housing, and even free money. But is it really free? We need to be careful. What are we willing to give? What are we willing to give up to get what we think we are going to get? It's like the classic childhood stories of finding a genie in a magic lamp and being given wishes. We may think we know what we want, but we often have not fully thought through the full impact and consequences. In Egypt, the people let the government take care of them like sheep. They let Yosef become like a shepherd taking care of them. When Vayigash states that Yosef fed them with food, the word used to feed here is nahal. Nahal more literally means to manage and to control, or as used here, to feed like a shepherd feeds his flock. Yosef fed them like a shepherd feeds his flock, managing and controlling. They were but sheep. They had lost their human identity. They had lost their humanity. It is important to note from this parsha that Yosef, that Egypt, did not even force the people. They did not force themselves upon the people to take their money, to take their livestock, to take their land, and even ultimately to take them in servitude. The idea, as I just read, the idea for the people to be servants actually came from the people themselves. We will become serfs to Pharaoh, they proposed. They had become so dependent on the government that they saw no other way. They gave up too much, which ultimately led to them giving up themselves. The people lost or actually gave up their dignity as people. They became dependent on the government. This parsha even has them giving themselves up to be slaves to the Pharaoh. If they had better vision, if they could see the future, would they have done as they did? What would you do if you knew what was to come? Would you choose to live differently? Your lives, all of our lives, are filled with choices. And while we may not know what is to be and what is to come, there is so much we can know and even do know if only we are to genuinely open our eyes and more fully look. We need to look beyond our immediate situations. We need to broaden our eyes and look at the big picture. We need to well think of the future. As such, we should learn to conserve. We should learn to responsibly save. If only the people of this parsha, the people of Egypt and Canaan, if only they had saved for themselves instead of depending on the government. If they had been more responsible for themselves, then they would not have ultimately given up everything they had and even given up themselves to the government. It certainly can be good for the government to be there to protect us, but that does not mean that we should not do what we are able to and should do to actually protect ourselves, to responsibly do our part. It is certainly not in our long-term best interests for us to just expect the government to do everything for us. If we are just in the present users, then ultimately we may find ourselves being so used. If those in and around Egypt had so responsibly conserved and saved for themselves, then they would better have been able to save themselves. By depending on the government, though, while they may have felt that they were benefiting at the time, they were actually they were creating a dependency for themselves that would ultimately lead to them losing themselves, to having to give away everything they had to get from the government, what they could have and should have done for themselves. As with which I began, I urge us to each ponder responsibility. I encourage us all to seriously, please ponder, how do we handle responsibility? I do encourage us all to be more responsible and to do what we can for ourselves and not to expect the government or anyone else to have to do for us. Such a lesson to be learned, in part from this week's Torah portion of Vayigash. And it is a lesson to be learned in our current world, and if we do not learn it now, then we will likely find ourselves learning it later, the harder way. After we allow our government to take so much more from us and allow ourselves to further lose ourselves. Certainly much worth pondering this Shabbat Vayigash. Please do seriously consider. And with that, I do very much wish you L'Shabbat Shalom.